Hi, I'm Rick Crow, and this is Short Track Stories.
All right, Sean, thank you so much for joining us here on Short Track Stories. You got that sweet setup here, Apache Rental Group. What is that? Give us a little layout of what that is.
It's basically what I do when I'm not fortunate enough to be at the racetrack or dealing with racing, watching racing. It's what I do for a living now. We have a rental company that we service television and film commercials. We rent pretty much anything you want. From golf carts to fiber optics.
Now, can I rent that swivel chair that you got there with the racing seat? Can I rent that?
Yes. We have tons of tables and chairs, sinks, and I mean, anything you need, we got, or we'll get it for you.
It's a pretty sweet setup.
Yeah.
So, Sean, before we recorded, you said that you were in Santa Clarita. Now, have you always been in Santa Clarita?
I personally, yeah, I'm a Saugus. I actually live in Saugus still. My parents still live in Saugus. I went to Saugus High.
Nice.
So I grew up out here when there was nothing but really Saugus Speedway and Magic Mountain.
Yeah, I, like my Uncle Rick, I graduated from Canyon. So fellow SCVer here.
Okay. Well, here's crazy. I live on Plum Canyon, which White's Canyon now goes over to Plum. And when we were all younger, it stopped, it didn't go through. And now there's houses and housing tracks, and that's where we live.
I know. So currently I'm up in Utah. I'm in northern Utah. Uncle Rick is in southern Utah. And every time I go back home, it amazes me at how much that valley is just exploding.
Yeah, it's some things are nice, but a lot of it is, too much for me. I'm still kind of a hillbilly that kind of like the 2-lane roads and, at the movie theater and stuff like that. But, more people enjoy coming out here. It's a great place to raise your kids and everything. So it's where we stayed.
That's awesome. So now really the main crux of why we want to talk with you. We see some beautiful cars there over your shoulder on the background. Where did everything really start for you, Sean?
Well, for me, like I said, my parents live up OK Canyon. And I think we moved out here in like late 70s. My dad was always involved in racing. He always loved racing growing up. And then my mom and my dad had a street stock and started racing at Saugus. Then my mom had a street stock. So my mom and dad both raced at Saugus, which, as a kid was
crazy, kind
of awesome. And then as important as Saugus Speedway was Indian Dunes. I grew up, racing go-karts at Indian Dunes. We'd race on the dirt oval there, and then you'd race Sundays on the airport. They would have a road course, and you would run. If you had 2 carts, eventually you'd run both classes and run on the dirt one night and road course the next. And for a while there, when we didn't have money, I remember running the dirt cart on the asphalt with dirt tires. Just to get experience, just because you wanted to go racing.
Right. Did you guys race on the same dirt track that we raced our stock cars on with the big drainage ditch in the middle of 1 and 2?
Yeah. Well, it was actually when I first started racing there, when I was a little kid, I think I was 8 or 9. We raced, there was a smaller track in the center. And then I remember they built the bigger track, and that's when everybody ran their enduros and stuff, but growing up out there, you go to the go-karts and I would be with Frank Moronsky, Keith Spangler, Bill Sedgwick was out there, Bob Kendall, Mike DeMarzo, all the Saugus Speedway guys, everybody was out there, and a lot of them raced go-karts and stuff. And we were just little kids out there playing around. And then, so we grew up as a family. Hornaday was out there. There was, Chuck Pittenger was out there. There was a lot of people looking back on it that now you're like, wow, Indian Dunes was just as important as Saugus was,
That's fair. That's legit to say that. And some of the stuff we've learned on these podcasts from True Cheek and some other guys, and are just some weird racetracks that I never saw growing up. and I did race at Indian Dunes with that Fun Time Racing on Sundays. And you're right, you run into DeMarzo everywhere. I mean, he was at Ventura on some Saturday nights or Friday nights, and then he would be out at Indian Dunes. And, so yeah. So Sean, I went to Saugus also. I was part of the split where we lived off of Langside by the 7-Eleven just before you'd go over the wash to go into Canyon Country. And I was the hard cut for, you can't go to Canyon anymore, you got to go to Saugus. So my senior year, I went to Saugus. And the only thing between Saugus High and the 7-Eleven was just a field. Like we used to just burn across the field, to go to 7-Eleven. There was nothing there yet. The Mormon church right there had just been barely built. So you're not very far behind that when you came out.
No, and I actually have some friends. The Smith family used to live right on Langside also, that went to Saugus, and they used to. Randy Smith actually was a guy that I played. We played Warriors football as kids, and I used to go pick him up on that street, and I would take him to Indian Dunes because I needed somebody to start my go-kart because my dad would drop me off. So Randy and I mean, we were 8 years old, and big Frank Moronsky would keep an eye on us. And, but I always had memories of going over there, picking up Randy. Then we'd go to Indian Dunes. My dad would drop us off at the front gate, and we'd push the go-karts in. And, all those people I was talking about, Kendall and all those guys, would keep an eye on you as a kid and make sure your go-kart ran for you. And I mean, they're great times. I mean, you couldn't trade it for anything.
Yeah, that's cool. And that's kind of how Saugus was too, like everybody kind of looked out for each other. And so I was surprised because I thought you were way younger than me. And I was looking, doing some homework, and, you're 8 years younger than me, but I would have thought that you were
way younger at this point.
Yeah, I would have thought you were way younger. And it's weird to see you now, sometimes I don't see you for big gaps. Like I hadn't seen you for a long time. And then I saw you at Orange Show and your late model. And, you had this big old burly freaking beard and goatee, and your hair was all cut and everything. I was like, damn, I don't even recognize Woodside anymore, Right. Yeah, so we go back to your mom and your dad. I remember sitting in the stands and watching them, race street stocks, and they were both good shoes.
Yeah, my dad was really good with this, building the street stocks. He figured all that stuff out, and there was a lot of great people. Like as I get older, I appreciate them more. Like, the guy that knew, you need these spindles off the 71 Impala to put on, they knew all the little parts, cause I remember going to, like, when I was a kid, I went everywhere with my dad, and we built this, he built the cars in the driveway at our house where he still lives. But, there was Joey Estoni and Kenny Bozay and all those guys, and everybody seemed like they helped everybody, Dave Harrison, Art Harrison, and there was Danny Chalgren and Alan Thacker and Jim Kent and all those guys. Everybody, even though everybody raced, it seemed like it was more of a family. You'd go over and get an A-arm for somebody, or somebody would send you to their house and grab this stuff. And I was a little kid, and everybody was, that's how I kind of learned about racing, was doing that. And then where we lived, ironically, was right across the wash. Pat Minnie Jr. and Sr. lived, and, they had Winston West cars, and Pat hadn't even started racing street stocks yet. But he lived across the street, and then, Roger Carafel was down the street, and they had a race car, and Jim Morrill lived down the street, and he had a race car. So it was just, just such a cool time. And so many, it just seemed like it wasn't all about money then. It was more about everybody getting to the racetrack and going racing, and then I had my mom. So we had two cars, and, my mom could drive, and my dad could drive. It was pretty good. And so naturally, you want to grow up and race, but my only problem is I wanted to race cars, and my mom and dad drove. And it's, when you get 15, 16 and you see Harvick and those guys are starting to drive cars, and Moronsky's racing and Keith Spangler's racing, and your parents are still racing, you're like, well, where do I fit in this deal?
Right.
And my dad's team basically was learn to work on the cars, learn everything you need to know about the cars. And then, we'll worry about driving. And my mom worked on the cars, Chris Pian, And I don't know if you remember like Keith Holder and Pete Ann had the Cadillac, but
that was a badass looking car.
Yeah. Him and my dad worked together. My mom would work on the cars. So it was always a family thing, it was very cool.
Where did your mom get that love or get that racing edge from?
My dad just, that was what we did. I mean, I played sports a little bit when I was a kid, but my dad was all about racing. I mean, I remember, even when you were doing yard work, you were listening to, the radio back then of, the guys racing at Riverside, or, we'd go to Mesa Marin or Ascot or anywhere just to go watch racing. And it wasn't just stock cars. We had my dad, where he worked, a place called Compact Video. There was a guy, Steve Deaver, who also raced. Later, he ran cars. There was a guy that had drag boat racing, Ricky Ray. And then Dale Poldy's dad worked there, the War Eagle car, the funny car. So we'd go drag racing one day, boats the next weekend, so it was always, everybody had to do something. So it was really just a great environment. And everybody, like I said, everybody was just seemed like nicer then. It wasn't, I hate to say it about money, but it wasn't about money. It was just people had the passion to go racing.
Yeah. So when I was a kid, my dad was something to do with Shelley's Auto, and they had Fortier, but I went to Hornby Elementary. We lived right behind Sierra Vista Junior High. And when I would cross White's Canyon, Leitholt lived on the left side corner house and Thacker lived on the right side corner house during their street stock days. Right across the street from each other. And so every day in fourth grade, I was going back and forth between them. And then you're right. It was a different time. I remember when you showed up with a box van and everybody was like, Woodside's rich, man. He's got a box van.
Right. Yeah. Box van. And we had Roman's old trailer that we had to load the car on backwards.
Yeah. And Jim Kent had the bread truck. And in 89, I bought an ice cream truck just to keep all my figure 8 and oval tires in. So I didn't have to unload them every week, and so you mentioned Carafel. So I raced with Carafel at Irwindale in modifieds, but I never knew, did he didn't race prior to Irwindale, did he?
His dad raced.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. His dad ran street stocks for a while back then.
At Saugus.
Yeah. So he raced, and then I don't remember like Dan Chalgren and Tony Balzano and, all the street stock guys. He had McKnight and Killian and Wrongway Willard and all those, but there was just so many, Rayburn's dad had a car,
right.
There's just so many people that raced, and it seemed like everybody had street stocks, there was
right
out there in Santa Clarita.
And the diversity of the cars was amazing, big Fords and big Impalas and Buick Regals with Kauzinski. And it wasn't like all Chevelles. It wasn't all Camaros. It wasn't all Novas. Right.
Yeah. Everybody had, like Tommy Atkins and those guys had, the big Impalas and, Joey Estoni and all those, he had a Nova. I think he even ran in the sportsman car. And then, it's kind of cool though. Everybody had something different, but everybody was just trying to go racing,
Right. Big Block Mike. I remember Mike Schoolcraft was his name or whatever. And
right.
Those were big boy cars.
Right. And that was before, like Schrader and Dinger and Brian Kelly and all those guys came into the street stock. Those were like the old school street stock guys.
Right.
Which I always thought was interesting is when I was a kid growing up, I knew the street stock guys. I just don't remember anybody like not that people look down on them, but now it's like everybody only worries about the premier division. Like you don't see people, kids and people knowing who the street stock guys were. When I was growing up, Rodney, I used to call Rodney my dad and my other dad, and he chased you around the pits and
right.
Watkinson. I mean, there was just so many people, but you knew everybody. And then, you had the press and the Third Kettles and True Cheek and all those guys, but those guys were like superheroes and the other guys were like race car drivers, but you still sat there and watched everybody, which was, I don't really see that anymore,
How much of that do you think had to do with figure 8s?
I think a lot, but I memean, how many people used to go to races just to see the zookeeper because he had stuffed animals hanging out of his car? John Kranz had the turtles, those things are always stuck in my head. And I don't remember, I don't see any of that, even later in life, TK and those guys, I love racing. I love that whole aspect of it. I just always looked at it was like, you were fortunate to get an opportunity to run the higher divisions. I didn't think, all those guys were more than capable of driving, just didn't get opportunities or they didn't want to, but I always loved the street stock stuff. I mean, I grew up maybe because my dad made me work on the cars and, but I always knew everybody that was there racing, and really enjoyed it too,
Yeah, and you're right. It was like a different evolution. So in '89, when I broke Cran's track record in street stock, it was like really an old record. And
right.
When I look at the difference in his car and my car, there was still no weight rule. And I guarantee you Cran's car was 32 or 3,300 pound Chevelle. And we had an 1.5 cage, 2,300 pound Chevelle,
right.
Of course you're going to break it. So the Kelly, the Schrader, my guy was Cromsite. He was really the guy that kind of advanced thought everything.
Right.
They kind of took it to like that next level of beautiful stuff. Like the work on Kelly's like Goddard car where Schrader worked, that was a professional car. That wasn't what we build in our driveways.
Right. It wasn't and the motors with, Grubbs was doing motors for people and Lizard Vince was doing motor. And it was like, that progression started,
right?
And I don't think you could stop it. Unfortunately,
In '89, I plugged the Grubbs motor into my car. He worked with my uncle on LAPD, and he had that shop out there. And I plugged that Grubbs motor in, and I was like, "You have got to freaking be kidding me!" Because Dinger had ERD; they were good motors. And Vince is your uncle?
No, well, Vince. He's not my real uncle, but he's Uncle Vinny.
That's cool.
Since I was a kid, because when I was a kid, my dad stopped driving for a while in crew chief for Roman Kalzinski when Roman started running the modified, the purple and white 09 car. And I was 13 or 14, I think. And so I worked on the car. We went down there 3 nights a week to Roman's house and everybody worked in the garage. Kirk Rockwell, there was just great people.
Guy.
Yeah. And Vince was the motor guy and I was like his kid, I slept, when we went out of town, I stayed with Vince, and then later in life, obviously, he built my motors for my car, but, I did everything. I would go down there with Vince and we'd assemble the motors and go to the dyno and see Guy Tripp. And, we did all that stuff, but I don't think a lot of guys get to experience anymore. I think they just pay for it, but, and Uncle Vin, he's Uncle Vinny, he's always been Uncle Vinny, so yeah, no, he's a great guy and, part of the family, from racing.
I can't imagine like your dad and Kalzinski walking into like a bar. You'd think like these two biker bar guys that just walked in, right? Big beards and some long hair going on. Like they didn't look like Herschel McGriff.
No, not at all. Especially, and Roman was so good. He was amazing. And that something for me that was crazy. Like when I first started driving a stock car, I went to Saugus and I tested the car, and my dad never really wanted to tell me how to drive, but I had Roman like, okay, kid, you know what to do. Let off there, turn there. And I'm like, I had Roman Kalzinski there telling me how to drive, which,
right.
And set up. And then he got in the car and, hey, it feels like this. And we're going to do that. It was like, and I had, I was 19, I think then, but had Roman Kalzinski, who I watched in figure eights and Sportsman and I grew up with, and his wife at the time, Cindy DeVar, she raced against my mom. So it was all like kind of a big family. I was very fortunate in that I was the youngest guy. I felt like to kind of come up through that type of thing, but it was a lot of fun.
You were young and my years came more, Gail Litchfield moved in next door to me when I was in, I think 10th grade or 11th grade. And then he did drywall and Thacker was his, drywall hanger. And I hung around with Thacker, and then they hung around with Mike Barnett, the plumber, and, John Christensen and I stocked drywall for Litchfield. And so did Ray Hooper. would do it. And so that was like my little introduction. I had been going forever, but those were like then the guys that you start like working in garages and stuff. And then, but you're right. These kids nowadays, they don't work on their stuff. And you were kind of fast tracked a little bit. So I was actually kind of fascinated because, and I even said this to Sedgwick, when you're racing the Saugus every Saturday night, sometimes guys disappear, and the West wasn't on TV. You'd see the West if they came to Saugus, but you never went to Mesa because you were racing at Saugus on Saturday night. And so, you never really, guys like Sedgwick, they just disappeared, but they were running the freaking West, I don't, it would be interesting. I don't think I don't know the whole story of Spears, and it was my understanding that it went from Dyer to like Kalzinski to Harvick to Horn. Do you know what that whole progression was? Because it was Dyer's first. I never even knew that.
Well, okay. So here's a crazy Spears story. Dyer, he had the 42 sportsman car that he ran at Saugus that Spears sponsored. And this is my understanding of the story. Then he wanted to go Southwest Tour racing. The tour was getting ready to start and there was kind of modifieds and stuff. But that car that Dyer actually ran, Wayne gave to my dad. And we took all the parts off that. And my dad had purchased, we had Robinson's old Monza. And we then we took the parts from that car and put a lot of them on the Monza. And that turned into a Camaro that my dad had run. And then when we were with Spears, it was the first year of the tour, which was either 85 or 86. And Roman started running a car, and Dyer but we were both running Spears cars at the time. And then, and Vince, basically Roman took his team from the modifieds at Saugus, and, my dad was crew chief. Vince came over, everybody moved over to there, and we went tour racing with Spears. And then, eventually I think it was then Sedgwick, I think Roman kind of left, Sedgwick was next. Then it kind of turned into, I think there was a couple other drivers in there, different guys. And then Press was there, and then Harvick. And, obviously we all know what happened with Harvick. But, Harvick ran the West Series I was driving for Claridge, and Kevin was driving the Spears car and running part-time trucks, I think, at the time. So, Wayne Spears really has it. I mean, when you look back, and then you had Hornaday, Hornaday was in there. He ran a tour car. I think he ran the truck. So Wayne really, not to mention just sponsoring the racetracks and stuff, he really helped a lot of people out over the years, more than people, I think, give him credit for. Him and his wife, Connie, were always very nice people and, beyond supported. I mean, they still do the SRL at this point. So pretty amazing.
Yeah. Can the SRL just take over NASCAR? That would be nice.
Yeah, no, definitely.
And so I was looking at, and you're right, the Spears, like I would love to have them on, because West Coast racing, I was thinking the other day too, if you kind of look at West Coast racing and you look at NASCAR today, when we talked to Hohenschel and guys like that, and the NASCAR guys used to come out, and there was some innovation that was going on out here that wasn't going on back there, but it was still a distinct line in the sand. Like the West guys were just field fillers. And when you look at, if you start looking at NASCAR championships right now, I haven't done the math, but if you did the math, I would bet you there's more NASCAR championships from the West Coast in the Cup Series than the East Coast. Because if you take Kyle Busch, Kurt Busch, Jeff Gordon, right, Jimmy Johnson,
Harvick, Kyle Larson,
Larson.
Yeah.
Isn't that freaky to think about? Like, it's actually a West Coast dominated sport.
Right. It really, well, I always thought, and this is just my opinion, is I always thought there were so many things to do on the West Coast versus being in this, and growing up in North Carolina. Nothing against any of those guys, but I think there's so many things here. Is if you want to be a race car driver, you really got to commit to it here. You got to go all in, because we all knew Monroe, the surfer. He surfed on the weekends and raced, and he did those things. But you really, people aren't into racing like they are when you go back there. It's a whole nother, like you're lot more opportunities. So if you want those opportunities out here, you kind of got to make them happen for yourself out here more. And maybe it makes you a little bit more hungry to win. And, you know, look at the longevity. I mean, when you say Jimmy Johnson, Kurt Busch is still racing, Harvick's still racing. I mean, those guys have been racing a long time, you know,
Right.
and competitive. There's not a lot, you know, it's kind of cool to think that the West Coast guys, you know, I think the two oldest drivers are West Coast guys now with Kurt and Kevin.
Yep.
So yeah, you know, and maybe competitive. It's a faster pace out here. So makes you more of a competitive person, or, you know, it just seems like you said, all the West Coast guys, cause you know, Inslow and those guys, I mean, look at Derek Thorne now. I mean, that guy is, I don't know why he doesn't have a ride in a different series. I mean,
I don't get it. And
those are the things that drive me crazy, that a guy like that doesn't have an opportunity, you know.
But even the SRX didn't. They snubbed him for Bubba Pollard.
Right. Which is, you know, I mean, that he's another good driver. But I mean, even look at Crafton in the trucks. There's another guy that's just keeps grinding. He's still competitive. He's fast. Another West Coast guy, you know, kind of that same time frame. But yeah, no, it's definitely interesting about this whole, you know, the whole West Coast thing.
So we talk about that, and you know, for you, my memory of you was you just showed up in the sportsman car one day, right? Like I don't ever remember you racing street stock or anything. I just remember you, like, it just seems in my mind like one day your dad said, "Hey, you know, go ahead and take a turn in that white with the pink stripe car." I remember in '89 in the Fall Spectacular, I have the video where I won the street stock dash and your dad won the sportsman dash, and we're both on the video together. And then all of a sudden, Slider's in the car. You know, is that kind of how it happened?
Well, here's how it happened. Like I said, I wanted to race. And, you know, at that point, you know, 18, 19 years old, you know, there was everybody, you know, Moronsky, you know, who's another lifelong friend. I still work with him. But Frank was racing, and I'm watching Frank race. I'm watching Spengler race. I'm watching all these guys race. My dad said to me, "I want you to do one more thing before you drive." I'm like, okay. So my dad says, there was a driving school, Duke Southard Driving School, that in New Smyrna. So my dad said, save some money up, go to that driving school. It teaches you chassis setup, and you get to drive the car and do all that stuff. So I go back there. I go to New Smyrna. I save my money. I go back. And ironically, David Rogers is back there. He was like NASCAR national champion. He just passed away recently, but I go back there, I do the school. And at that point I knew how to set up cars and work on them. But I really hadn't driven stock cars, you know? So I go back there, run some laps and do the school. It's a week-long deal at the end. He goes, you've never driven? I said, well, go-karts and stuff. And he says, oh, you should probably think about driving. I'm like, okay. So I called my dad. I'm all, hey, this guy says I should start driving. And then he offered, hey, why don't you stay this weekend and work on my car with me? And he was going to race at New Smyrna. So I did that. I flew home. My mom's got we had a Monte Carlo Aero Coupe. I think it was like an 86 Monte Carlo Aero Coupe for Mesa Marin up there. And my dad says, if you get that ready, you can practice it. And my mom says, how about this? Whoever goes fastest gets to race the car. So we go to Mesa Marin, and just being a 19-year-old guy, my dad gets in the car. He goes, I get in the car. I go a little quicker than my dad. My mom gets in the car and goes faster than both of us. I'm like, my mom just went faster. So maybe I'm not ready to race. Right. So we come home. My mom says, you can race. You can race the car. If you get it ready, you can race it. And it happened to be that big October end of the year race at Mesa Marin. So we went up there.
Those were great, weren't they?
And I'd never run Saugus. We just went to Mesa Marin. And my dad's like, go. So we go, and we were pretty fast. The motor broke. That was it. So we were all done. So during the off season, we're freshening everything up. And my dad happened to work on Soul Train, the show. And Soul Train shot on Saturdays. So my uncle and I would take the car to the track. We go to Saugus. Will Harper's there, and all Sigmund, all of them, And my dad says, hot lap the car, make sure everything's good, and then I'll be there hopefully last practice or qualifying. So I go out and practice, and we run right with Harper. And I come in, and my uncle go back out again, go back out. And I try to go faster. I spin the thing out, come back in. My dad shows up, and my uncle says, hey, he's pretty fast. So my dad ran the car during the week. He said, hey, do you want to split the year? And I said, what? And he said, do you want to split the year? I said, driving? He said, yeah. So he ran a couple more races, and then I got in the car towards the end of the year. And I think I ran like 2 races, and then it was the big open comp stuff at the end of the year. And I think we qualified like 6th or 7th, but that was Borneman and Jerry Gay and Chuck Minch and all those guys were there.
Back to home.
No, this was at Saugus, the 100 lap, round robin at the end of the year. And I think we finished 5th or 6th in the race. And then my dad was basically like, well, maybe you should just keep driving. So, and that was it, sportsman car. And, my dad was nice enough to, he had to keep working to pay for it. So he couldn't be there as many weekends, but I still had Vince and my uncle and, all my buddies and stuff. And that's how we just started going racing.
So let's talk about one weekend when your pops wasn't there and you guys lived pretty close to the track. And
right.
I seem to remember a bunch of slick-haired looking long-haired dudes disappearing after practice and coming back in swim trunks with like hair just still dripping wet before qualifying.
Yeah. That was not the first time I got called in the blockhouse, but that was second time that Monty asked me to come into the blockhouse. What are you guys doing? I said, it's hot out. We went home, went swimming. I mean, we're kids. We're trying to have a good time, right? And he's like, well, you practiced and then you guys left. You can't leave. I'm like, what do you mean? You just can't leave. So he thought we were all partying. We just went and jumped in a pool, cooled off, and came back. We live right down the street,
Right.
Went out and fortunately set fast time, won the main event. And then they told us we weren't allowed to leave anymore. So I was like, but I mean, we're just young kids having a good time, at the time, and we lived close. I'm sure everybody else that lived from out of town was like, really?
Right. Would you have done that if your dad was at the track that day?
No. Dad wouldn't have gone for that. But
your mom I always felt was more the whip cracker than your dad. Like if you did something in the pits, I was more worried about your mom coming over than your dad.
Yeah. I mean, they were both pretty fired up most of the time. I think maybe being an only child or something. I don't know. My mom, very defensive and, my mom never liked to lose either, so, when things happen, she was pretty fired up most of the time. I mean, had some great times in the pits with people, but, everybody got along in the end, I think.
Right.
Did they have like a specific division for women at that time, or were they just commingled and mixed with everybody else?
They raced together. I mean, I remember sitting at dinner and my mom telling my dad, "Hey, next time you pinch me up, I'm
going to turn you."
And like my mom was, my dad had a Chevelle that had a big block in it, and then my mom had a small block in her Chevelle, and the thing was bright orange. And then my dad would run my mom's car in the figure 8 because the big block didn't handle that good in the figure 8. So we'd move the seat and stuff. And, it was pretty wild. I mean, when people ask, hey, what do you guys do? Oh, my mom and dad race. It was kind of eye opening, especially back then. There wasn't a lot of women race. There wasn't Dan Patrick or anybody. And like I said, my mom she was fast. That was, on top of it. And my mom's little, she's maybe 5'1", so she's little and she's out there and, we can make the cars work and, she could get it done.
How many between the guesstimate between the both of you and your time out there, how many women would you say you saw racing?
Gosh, I would say Cindy. There was another lady there was Sue Pentonato, Cindy DeVar, my mom.
Cindy Necessary.
Yeah, Tony. There was a lady named Tony too that raced.
Pit and Auto.
Yeah, and then I'd say that's pretty close as I remember.
Probably about 6. But they did have a division called a powder puff division.
Right.
Is that where you started?
Yeah. They would race that, like they'd have a mechanics race once in a while, or powder. That wasn't sexist or misogynistic or anything, the powder puff. But then those ladies started just running their own stuff. Necessary had her hobby stock, and Devar raced, and they were good shoes. I mean, they ran up front, and I've always been fascinated, Sean, by the guys that. So if you took, like, say, let's just say you and Minty or Rayburn, street stock, Blankenship, right? Street stock, hobby stock fast, street stock fast, modified fast, super late model fast. The same guys, when they moved, were always super fast. To me, I could stay motivated there, but there were 20 other guys in a main event that never won a main event, never won a dash, never were. Those guys fascinate me, that they stuck to the task every week. What we would call a NASCAR field filler.
Right.
Without them, no show.
Yeah. No, that is we look at that all the time. Even now, we go to Irwindale, I'm like, especially with rule changes and stuff, these poor guys, rule change and you just can't get the car there. It's just not going to happen. But yeah, no, but I think they enjoyed racing. I think it was, instead of taking the boat out and going skiing or to the river, they went racing,
Right.
I think that was just kind of everybody. And I mean, back then the stands were packed, your friends came out, people were drinking beer. I mean, I just think it wasn't so corporate. It was more of a hangout. I mean, Saugus Speedway on a Saturday night, if you lived in Santa Clarita, what else was there to do but go there, and wow, I got some friends racing too. This is even better,
Right.
So I don't think it got any better than that,
What a blessing that was. And, if it was open today, it wouldn't get those kind of people in the stands because of ESPN. And
well, what was the coverage like? I know, Sean, you mentioned, like, doing yard work and you'd be listening to guys racing in Riverside or Ontario, whatever, on the radio. But like, what was the coverage like? Like, who were doing the broadcast?
It was like MRN or whatever. The radio was basically everything. I mean, I always remember this because Ron Zajac, everybody used to call him Pollock, was Hornaday was racing at Riverside, and he passed Herschel McGriff, I think, for the lead. And that was like Southwest Tour type cars back then, and the rear end broke. And I remember my dad going, "Oh, Pollock," and because Hornaday's rear end had broke, when he was going for the lead. But you didn't watch it on TV. You were just listening to, Eli Gold or whatever was calling the race.
I don't remember who called him, but I remember.
Yeah.
So mainly, was it just like word of mouth? It was just like the racers and everybody. I know you said in Saugus, but like, what about the other tracks?
I don't think there was much. I don't remember radios or TV shows really of other tracks and stuff until kind of later. I mean, that's where I was very fortunate, is I kind of felt like, Winter Heat came up with TV. So everybody went to Tucson to go to those races. Saga, the truck series had started. You get a Southwest Tour race here or there, like Sonoma and Phoenix would be on, what was that? American Sports Cavalcade or whatever it was back then. That you would get a race here or there. But that was kind of the change, is like once Winter Heat happened and they had those Thursday night ESPN on ESPN2, the midgets with Jeff Gordon and all that stuff, then everybody started looking at TV. So it was kind of that kind of helped sponsors, I think, and kind of propelled people to get a little bit more interested in racing, where Saugus was kind of just word of mouth, I think it was just, guys in your neighborhood were racing, or you could hear the cars. So people would stop there, and, it's such a small area back then.
Well, I just think what fascinates me, obviously, the generation with the technology and everything between us three here, obviously there's a little bit of a gap, but like just doing this podcast and everything, it's just like the wild, wild west, it's, you sit around the campfire and tell stories about True Cheek and it's just crazy that there really isn't very much like documentation about all this.
No, I mean, there was Steve that used to videotape all the races, and you would go, and on Sunday he would call and say, "Hey, I got tapes ready for you, so you could watch the race from the night before." And it was just him up there with a camcorder. But even before that, it was very rare that, you know, the Dan Presses and the True Cheeks and the Third Kettles and Insolo and all those, like, there wasn't that coverage or that interest. You know, you'd look in the newspaper on Sunday to see who won where, you know, hopefully, or Tuesday, but, you know, if it was out of town, you know, in the Winston West, everybody, you know, you waited for the, you know, NASCAR. There wasn't email there, you know, you're waiting for the magazine or newspaper. So that part of it's changed a lot, you know. Steve Gardner, I think his name was, did all the tapes, right?
Have you converted yours? Because I have a whole freaking crate in my garage right now.
I have a ton of, I have not, I should probably, but I mean, literally, I remember Sunday you would, especially if something happened,
yeah.
Hey, you got the tape yet? You know, and I'll call you, and he'd be making copies, and you'd go over there, and there'd be 4 other guys waiting in his driveway to get a copy of the tape because you wanted to see what happened.
Right.
So we're now, you know, you just turn on low budget TV and, hey, Irwindale's live tonight, or
right,
you know, track. So,
and it's funny because I think it was about probably 92. There was a dude on the backstretch that he signed up for $20 a night, one person in every division, and he'd do a tape just for you.
Right.
And so that kind of probably tapped into Gardner's, you know, a little bit. But
is Steve still alive?
I don't know where he's at.
I think he passed away. I think he did. I've seen his son a few times since then, but I for some reason I thought, unfortunately, that he passed away. But there's another great guy. That guy Steve Gardner would take me in my go-kart to COC parking lot with his son, and we'd ride our go-karts around sometimes on Saturday before the races. And then he'd drop you off at the racetrack.
That's awesome, man.
Like, people, you know, the things people did back then when you're younger, it was pretty awesome, you know?
Right. I remember Hooper had that Mustang. It was kind of an ugly Mustang. And when we worked for Litchfield, we went up to the park in Valverde. I had a 69 Chevelle with the 396, and he had that Mustang. Right. And we raced around the basketball court up in Valverde, which was like an abandoned town at the time. And man, we must have done freaking 100 laps around that thing. And he put a big old dent in my left rear quarter panel, and my dad was pissed. But you're right. I mean, we'd hear it. My mom would listen to it on the radio. I don't know how she knew it was on the radio, but if we didn't go to Riverside, she'd listen to it on the radio. And
right.
It wasn't professional. There was nothing. The first TV was the cable, local cable, whatever it was back then. It wasn't Comcast. It was, you know, Santa Clarita's cable company came out and they filmed and they put it on Tuesday nights.
Oh yeah. Yeah. That's right. I remember that.
Those have totally disappeared. Like, they're not on YouTube. They're not on anything. Like, nobody knows where those are.
I wonder if SCTV like has some of that stock footage or something.
I don't know. And then Barry McKeever started coming out with KBET. They would come out every Saturday night and interview and do stuff. But that was, you know, the first. But it's kind of like how Sean said, it was more like the signal. Like, you waited for that Sunday signal or the Tuesday signal to drop because
Tim from the Signal would, and you were
Trepany.
Yeah, you were just like, I must have done well because, like, he called me or he came over and talked to me.
Yes.
If he didn't come talk to you, you know, it was a bad night.
Yeah. The Signal would do stuff. And then Trepany, he left the Signal and went to the Daily News, and he still covered. And then a guy named Vince Kowalik for the LA Times started covering.
Right.
Just Saga stuff, but no TV, no radio. So,
but even Barry McKeever, okay, later in life.
Good old Barry. I did high school football with him.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
But he was a cheerleader, though, for years. No? He played? What? Barry played? He wasn't a cheerleader?
Yeah, he was probably a cheerleader.
No, yeah. Yeah. I mean, depending on what mood he was in, you know, he had different stories about whatever he did.
Well, he ended up going to Mesa Marin when Saugus closed and was one of the announcers. So then, like, for me, that helped because all the Saugus guys that had left Saugus when it closed and went to Mesa Marin, we had Barry. So he still took care of us. So it kind of helped us, I think, with the fans and people up there because he knew us more than he knew the Bakersfield guys.
Interesting.
So, but, you know, because when Saugus closed, we all kind of what are we going to do now? So we went to Mesa Marin.
I went to Kern County in
Right.
Orange Show, but did they still call you a Flatlander when you went up there after Saugus closed? They still yell it out when your name was announced?
No, I got pretty lucky up there because I drove, I wrecked my car one night, and Steve McGowan up there and Terry Henry and all the locals, they loaned me McGowan's car so I could still race for the points up there. And after that, I was like Bakersfield. I was just one of the Bakersfield guys. I was, Harvick's old man. I wasn't, Mike Harvick at that point wasn't helping us, but Kevin was there and Terry Henry and all those, Collins and all those guys kind of took us in at that point because we could race with them, which was, I'd gone up there the year before and, could barely stay on the same lap with those guys. And then when we came back and started to figure it out, but yeah, they stopped making fun of us, especially, back then I had long hair and a pink and white car in Bakersfield. So it was a little rough first couple races up there.
There's kind of a joke, Brandon, that the first time I stood behind Sean in the pit credential line, I said to my buddy, damn, who's that chick? Like, she's freaking hot, man. Because Sean was kind of slight back then too, and his hair, he looked like freaking Jacqueline Smith. I mean, just beautiful black hair, and I was standing behind him like drooling, and he turns around. I'm like, oh damn. But
when did you guys first meet?
Probably around, what year was that Monza car or whatever?
When was that? Late 80s, I'd say.
Probably late 80s, and then
late 80s.
I followed him in a super late model for a couple thousand laps one year.
Right.
And, you mentioned Harper's car. I mean, Burdett and I swapped cars. I think it was 90, maybe 90. And I started in a car that was Cromside and I built, but it was, I forgot whose car. It was somebody else's super late model. And it was kind of more of just a straight 3-link, simple car. And then Burdett and Richard Johnson built that Jackson car. And then like 3 races in, they had a falling out, and I ended up in the Jackson car, and Burdett ended up with that guy Jim Thorne, Spa City, in my super late model. I didn't really like the Jackson cars. I felt they were really long. They had a Watts link in them, so they were really wishy-washy in the corner. But Harper sure did. Freaking, he made that thing work.
Right. Well, it's interesting. My car was the Monza was we took it to Scheidecker, Dave Scheidecker, out in Orange Show. And that's where we converted it. But that was a Watts Link car with Ford Torino front clip on it, and so it had rear facing strut rods on it. Kind of
interesting.
Yeah, and that car, and then the rest of it was the Speedway Engineering, the Monza, which was, we used to call it the tank because it was pretty rough. It's pretty hard to hurt that thing. But yeah, the Jackson car, I always thought, like, the sportsman division, I thought Spangler and Harper changed the whole sportsman division, because when Spangler came out with that left-hander car, it was beautiful. I mean, and then Harper came out with that Jackson car. I was like, uh-oh, like, no more, Buicks and, people trying to just put wide tires on street stocks and go race. They built race cars, and I think it kind of changed everything, because Phipps and those guys, I think it kind of caught up to them too, as money had come into the sport at that point,
Flash in the pan guys, not Spangler. I mean, love those guys, but like Harper. But you're right. And one of the greatest things I always felt about Saugus was, when I moved from hobby stock to street stock, it was like one tax return check. Sell the hobby stock, get a tax return, go to street stock, and then you could go to pro stock. Like, you could move up fairly easy because the chassis and the bodies. But man, that Monza has to be one of the all-time iconic cars to ever run around Saugus Speedway. That car was just a freak show. You're that and Padan's Cadillac. Yeah,
no, it's crazy. Yeah, I remember the Monza when we got it. It had truck arms on it from Robinson. And that my dad, he ran probably a half a season of modifieds with the Monza, and then we switched it over to the sportsman cars. But that was just an awesome car. And that thing, we took it everywhere, won with it pretty much everywhere we went with it. I mean, even winter heat that one year, we sat on the pole and should have led the race until the transmission broke. And it was an old car, but it was just right. I mean, it just wherever we went, we didn't really change anything. It was, we changed the gear, go to Orange Show, go to El Cajon.
Right.
It was just,
that's what was cool about back then. That that little tour at the end of the season, Cajon, Craig Road, Orange Show, those were cool. So you're one of the few guys, let's say few, like a handful, that you've had a start in every division, every top tier division of NASCAR. And I have a whole list of fascinating questions, but you're the 99 West champion, and you had a couple of good owners in Claridge who was very well funded. And, but you started out with McNally, and
I actually started with Claridge.
Yeah, Claridge. Then you went to McNally, and then Gone like the articles say he took that ride from you.
Well, that's I wouldn't say I was hired to drive. I was a hired driver. I had Claridge at the time had shut down the Cinema Vehicle Service team, and he helped me out a little bit financially. And then I had through Claridge, I had the Hoosier Tire deal at the time, and I went to McAnally's. They offered me to drive the car, and percentage of the winning, hired driver, and I won the championship. And I had
know where this is going.
Yeah, no, it was. I mean, it really changed everything for me at the time. Is I turned down a test with a couple of truck teams. I turned down the Roush test, and we went to Japan and won the championship. And Bill said, "McAnally's, I got good news and bad news." And I said, "What's the good news?" And he says, "Good news is somebody bought the team, and we're moving the whole thing to Vegas." And I said, "Okay, what's the bad news?" He goes, "You're not the driver anymore. Brendan's going to drive the car." And for me, if I would have known that a little bit earlier, I probably could have tried to. But at that point, Hornaday was moving out of the truck. I thought I was going to have some truck races. From Napa, because we were all Napa guys. So it just, circumstances didn't work out. And for me, it kind of left me by that point, the other rides were gone. Even West stuff was tough. But I had, Bob Farmer came along, and I ended up replacing, Dennis Dyer was going to step out of the car for a little while, another Saugus guy. So I ended up driving for Bob Farmer in the tour and had a great time. I met the Walkers. We did a West program with the Walkers. So it's just an interesting time. And back then I even went back East, and at that was just the start of, you walk in the door and it was, well, how much sponsorship money you have? We don't care if you can drive or not, is how much sponsorship money.
There's drivers sweeping their floor. Right. And it's funny that you say that. So Gone you must have been right in the middle of that change of rentals, because after you got out of that car, it was pretty much a rental and a profitable business for McNally the rest of the way.
Yes. And he capitalized. We won the championship, and Brendan's a great driver, and he's very fortunate. He's financially, he could back and do what and he went on to run Cup and do, he did great things. But yeah, that was kind of the game changer. And for me, looking back on that whole thing was the difference between, I would say, myself and Harvick and Kurt Busch was I enjoyed racing. I never thought that I was going to go to Cup and make a living racing. I just was trying to win in whatever division I was in. And I thought the rides would come, where I think like Harvick was always super business savvy. He was all about wanting to make a living racing from day one, whether he worked for Spears, for whoever. He knew this is what he wants to do for a living. And I kind of looked at it was, I just wanted to win races. And for me is I won at Saugus, and I first I got to drive Harry Brady's car for Jim Bender. And then, I got a call from, this guy, and I would drive different cars in different cars. I never sat back and said, hey, you know what? I want to go Cup racing. But Harvick and Kurt Busch definitely were heading that direction. And then guys like Brendan Gaughan were like, well, if I'm spending this money doing this, I might as well just, go Cup racing or own our own truck team,
You were thinking tour, right? That's what we were all thinking. If we could go race some tour races, that would be pretty cool.
And I mean, my mentality was at that time, I thought you had to win races and win championships before you went to the next level. I didn't have financially, and looking back on it, I was so narrow-minded in the aspect of I should have spent my money looking for sponsors instead of spending money on going racing.
Right.
Because it probably would have got you to the same place. But I enjoyed racing and working on the cars and doing all that. And I met so many great people. Things just always kind of kept falling in place for me, So
were you in your studio gig by then?
Yeah, I'd always done my dad had told me to work studios enough to always keep health insurance. So I always worked, I did the Jamie Foxx show and that would be like 3 days a week, or I'd do an award show on the weekends that I wasn't racing, or I'd take off the Saturday. But yeah, I was always doing the studio stuff.
Because I always wondered, I thought you were a super talented driver, as was, Menti Jr. and as was Lance. I thought you were better than Lance personally. I always wondered, like, why didn't Woodside go back east?
I did. I went back there and knocked on doors, and I mean, Jimmy Johnson got me a test with Herzog's, and it just started to come down to, at the end of the day, I think there's a lot of us that can drive race cars, and then there's a lot of us that have a little bit of money behind you, and then there were businesses, and I didn't, until the McAnally deal, I didn't look at it as a business. When I drove for Claridge, I was at Mesa Ren. They said, "Hey, what are you doing next weekend?" Jeff Schrader was, working on the car, and Mike Stewart and Gerald Kent. It was all Saugus guys again.
Right, right.
Lance was going to go back east. Hey, we want you to try out. And I hadn't even run Southwest Tour really. I was like, "Want me to go west racing?" Okay. And they took me to Mesa Ren. We tested, and I got the ride, and I was like, "Oh, this is cool." Like I didn't need money. I wasn't. I didn't like, "Hey, I need a contract." It was Claridge said, "Hey, do you want to drive the car?" Mike Stewart, "Are you going to drive?" "Okay, you drive. We're crew chief. If you can come to the shop and clean stuff up and help out any way you can when you're not working, that'd be great." And that was it. That's how where now I don't think you can really do that. I mean, it's like you show up and you rent a car, or you bring a sponsorship and you get a percentage of that to make your living. So it was just a different world,
It almost just seems like, for me on the outside listening to you guys, like in the Sandlot, when the crew is just doing their own thing for the love of it, and then they have the rich preppy kids with like the uniforms, they come. That's just the vibe that I'm getting from everybody, is that, like, once you go back east, so to speak, that's when everything just shifts, and people kind of lose like the heart of what racing really is. Is that what you guys feel, or is that just me?
I would just say that the best drivers aren't in Cup or Xfinity or trucks.
Right. I would agree. I mean, honestly, I don't know Derek Thorne. I think I've talked to the guy once, but when I watch that guy on TV, he's impressive. I mean, he is lights out. I mean, he's the best I've ever seen against, I would love to have seen him back in the day with some of the best racing I've ever seen is Hornaday and Corelli in Southwest Tour cars. And you had Brian Germoni and Rodman, and I would love to see him against that caliber back then. But, our memories are always, I was a lot faster back then too,
Right.
But for that guy not to have an opportunity in at least Xfinity or a truck or a Cup is mind boggling to me, that there's not an owner out there that says, that guy, he's fat. I mean,
right.
And I see that now is I think there's a lot of these kids too, is I didn't grow up in the aspect of, I grew up, you need to win to go to the next level, where I don't see that now. I see 10 races in a legend car. Next year, you're in a junior late. Next year, you're in a pro late. Next year, you're in the West. Next year, in a truck. And I guess if financially it doesn't affect you, then that's the route you go. I just was always about winning.
Right.
You had to win, because I mean,
it's about their money. They have the money to do it. They can do it.
Right. Because there's guys like, I mean, some of the best guys I raced against. David Gilliland was awesome at Irwindale. Dave Gillen was good everywhere he went. He could work on a car. And there's a guy that was talented that went back there and got an opportunity that you go, okay, that guy worked hard. You know, he deserves it. He pulled it off. You know, Kurt Busch and those guys, they worked hard to make cars run fast. You know, he has a lot of knowledge of cars. Kevin Harvick, you know, those guys worked hard. And now I think you find people to work hard for you, you pay for it. And it's just a different time. I don't think there's a right or wrong. It's just things changed, you know? So
Right.
it's kind of, I don't want to sound bitter towards anybody. It's just a different racing has changed in that aspect.
So you never paid $65,000 to race the McNally car?
No.
That's a going rate. Will Rogers, 65 grand a race. We've heard it from a number of different kids.
Ultimately, is everybody's getting paid now. It's not your buddies going to the racetrack anymore. These guys are professionals, you know, they're fat fitters. They're, you know, so I mean, the times have changed, you know. I mean, for me, some of the most enjoyable stuff is Mike Harvick and I, and you know, my partner, Tim Sweet, we built a late model just to go to Irwindale and have a good time and race. And, you know, we go to Bakersfield and we'd work on the car and still have a good time and do it that way, because we could afford to do it. It didn't matter if we wrecked the car or not, but, you know, we won some races with the car. And, you know, I really enjoyed working with Mike and Tim and, you know, my buddies, you know, Duryea, all those guys have been with me forever, still going to the races with me, you know, so it was just, it's still enjoyable. You know, we're still running a late model now. I got Lenny White driving the car because he did so well when he filled in for me. Right. So we left him in the car, but Rip goes to the races with us. Stevie Boldroff, Donnie Johnson's grandson, goes to the races, you know, with us still. So it's still, I still kind of have that same vibe and group of people, you know, to go racing that are racers, you know.
I'd go racing again if I could get a kid to come home out of the freaking military. Well, you know, I'd throw one of them in a car.
Well, I'll tell you which one you shouldn't, because that one on iRacing is a little rough. Maybe Joey can drive.
Hopefully Joey can drive, right? Dude, Garrett ended my racing career because he destroyed my late model at Irwindale in like 5 laps, hit the wall full throttle, flipped it up on its side and caught it on fire. And then he joined the Army like 3 days later.
That's probably a good call at that point.
Yeah, he ran like a little chicken shit, you know. But so, hey, so let's, you know, I was looking at some of the West races that you ran, you know, not the combined ones, but just some legit West races with 35 to 40 guys showing up to a race. The whole Harker Menard series right now, East, West, North, South, you know, all the crap that they've done with that to ruin that. I wish Spears would take that over. I bet you there's probably not 40 running Arca Menards cars in the United States of America right now. You know, it's just crazy. But so you won at Tucson, and you're a humble guy, a funny guy. So you won at Tucson. In that race with Sedgwick, Rick Corelli, Mike Chase, who I just saw a couple weeks ago in Darlington, Hooper, Ray,
right,
and Portengay. That's no slouch race. You run at Vegas with Nadeau,
right,
Hornaday, and Kurt Busch. Did you meet Nadeau?
I did not. I wish I did, because I did enjoy his podcast on Dale Jr.'s.
Yes, fascinating story.
Yes.
When you went to Fontana, Craven, Schrader, Mike Wallace, I mean, there were some big names in the West. When you were running the West, you didn't have a free pass to win that championship or get 7 wins. You were running with some big guns.
Yeah, I mean, I think like I said, I was very fortunate, and we had all the new racetracks too. California Speedway, Fontana opened, Irwindale opened, Vegas opened, Pikes Peak opened, Kansas we got to run. I mean, it was just very, very fortunate at that time. And then the Cup guys would come and run some of those races to get experience, you know, and you get to run them. And then you would really see, like I went to Sears Point. I'll tell you this funny story. I went to Sears Point. I never rode race before in my life. I went to the Cup combined race. I had the provisional because Hooper had won the championship. And I went out to qualify, and Mike Stewart, my crew chief at the time, told me Mark Martin didn't lift until the bridge. So you got to hold it wide open to the bridge. So I held it wide open to the bridge. The car spun out. I went through the dirt, but I wasn't a road racer. I went from Saugus Speedway, you know.
You didn't have a bunch of sim time?
Back then, they didn't even have sim. But I just remember as once I got kind of settled in, I ended up Lance was actually driving for somebody else. I ended up behind Hooper, and in between Hooper and I were Dave Marcus. And I remember, like, you're thinking Dave Marcus. And I remember I was driving my ass off, and I'm like, I could barely stay like 5 cars behind Dave Marcus.
He was probably 80 then.
Yeah, and he was just cruising. And I'm like, wow, like, you know, just how good all those guys are. And you lose perspective of that until you're actually on the track and you realize, like, wow, these guys are fast. You know, there was another guy, Mike Wallace, that used to come run West races with us, and great guy. I mean, he used to come over and help me on the big tracks. He would suggest stuff, tell me, you know, just an awesome guy. But, you know, those guys would just go out and fire off at California Speedway, you know, wide open into one. Nothing's warmed up. You're like, oh, wait, I got to warm up the rear end and stuff. And they're like, it's warm. We just go.
I think that's like a $167.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're just like, wow, like these guys are on the next level of that's not where we're accustomed to, you know.
But you had no seat time compared to those guys. You know, you went bam, bam, bam. How about Loy Allen? You followed him at SB3. Did you ever meet him? He was another one of those fast guys that kind of came and gone. Nadu, you know, Loy I remember that name. I think he had the Hooters car.
Yeah, Loy Allen. I was doing something for McAnally in Sacramento, and they called me. Clay Robinson, you know, and Chris Robinson, great engine builder. His son Clay changed tires on the car, and they were struggling in Friday practice. And Clay said, "If you can get here, they'll let you practice the car." I said, "What?" He goes, "Yeah, if you come down here." I'm like, "A cup ride?" He's like, "Yeah." So I drove from where I was. Frank Moronsky had a hotel room. I stayed in his hotel room. The next morning, showed up, and Donnie Allison was the spotter, which was awesome because it's Donnie Allison. Right. And Jerry Pitts was, I think Jerry Pitts was either the car chief or the crew chief. And I got in the car and I went out and I did like 3 laps. And I said, "Hey, you know, it's bottoming out. It's doing this, doing that." But I had gone faster than Loy Allen. And so they went to change everything. And I think it was Butch Gilliland broke a motor, and that ended practice. And I had to go out and qualify. And they told me, "If you can go out and do a 113 flat, we'll make the show." So, okay. I went out and did a 113 flat. Butch Gillen's over there changing motors, gets his car done, and he goes out and goes like a 112.7 and knocks us out of the show. And so they told me, "Hey, why don't you come back east?" And I thought this was big show. "Come back east and we'll fit you in the car, and you know, maybe we'll go run Watkins Glen or something." So I go back there. I'm there for like 2 days and go into the shop, and Hut Strickland's in there. And I go, "What?" He said, "Hut Strickland's going to drive the car. He brought a sponsor." And I was like, okay. Went back to Clay's house, and that was it. Right. But it was cool opportunities that I always felt like, you know, if I wasn't around, you wouldn't get those opportunities. And I was fortunate enough to get to do stuff like that. So.
Well, historically, you're sandwiched between Loy Allen and Hut Strickland on the
yeah.
So that's awesome. So a couple of quick things here. What's your opinion on starting parks? You were part of that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, that was the most money I ever made racing at that point.
They used to actually put it in the LA Times. You're talking about waiting for the LA Times to come out to see what happened. It just in the back score, Brandon, you know, like where they keep the stats, it would say, you know, Dale Earnhardt running $55,000, and it would do the whole. Now NASCAR doesn't even disclose what they pay if you're not a charter team. They don't even tell people what you get paid.
Right. Yeah. No, they brought, like, California Speedway did that quite a few times, you know, for people, and you know, it was great for the teams because, you know, the teams would make some money and get a couple of laps. You get to meet them, and then, you know, hopefully maybe something would happen from there. But yeah, I did that for the trucks, I think, and I did it for Xfinity at Fontana. But you know, it's pretty frustrating though, to go do 2 laps and pull in and like, yeah, that was great.
Right.
But at the time, like I said, it was a way to pay the bills. So,
right. So, what would it mean to you get in the West Coast Hall of Fame?
I think it'd be cool. I mean, I definitely respect all the people in there, and it's kind of, when I look at their stats versus mine, I mean, there's some pretty good shoes in there that have won a lot of races that, I'm just a guy from Saugus, I just got lucky, just me and my mom and my dad, and, a couple of fortunate, you met people that gave me opportunities. So I think it'd be pretty cool,
Yeah. What's that saying? Fortune favors the brave, but luck is for the ill-prepared. And you guys, certainly one of the first families of Saugus Speedway, you guys were always grunting your ass off and stuff. So we're going to close it out, Sean, with one little new thing that I have just for you. And it's going to be a rapid fire qualifying lap.
Okay.
So fast time at Saugus Speedway, 15:54 or something. So 15 seconds. So best Saugus driver in history.
Hornaday Jr.
Ooh. Okay. Favorite NASCAR Cup driver right now?
Yes, I got to go with Harvick, just because I know him.
Favorite musical artist?
Aaron Lewis.
Yes, there we go. Grammys or CMAs?
Ooh. That's tough. That's how I make my living. I love both shows evenly.
Okay, all right. That's a good NASCAR political answer there. For your sponsorship deal. Chocolate or vanilla?
Chocolate.
Coke or Pepsi?
Pepsi.
There we go. You got anything for him, Brandon?
The last question I was going to ask is something I ask everybody. The last two questions I have for you. First one is, do you have any regrets about your racing career?
I wouldn't say regrets. I just wish knowledge. I wish I had more knowledge. Like I said earlier about like Harvick. I feel like if I would have looked at it as a business more than just going racing, I probably would have been a little more successful in racing.
And the other one, excuse me, that I ask everybody is in your opinion, Sean, what makes a good racer? Is it something that can naturally be developed, or is it something that people are just born with?
I think it can be developed. I mean, Sean Monroe is probably a prime example, and more than the driver is the people you surround yourself with. Mm-hmm. I mean, you got to have great people. You got to have a good engine builder. You got to have a good chassis guy, a good spotter, and then all those things allow you to become a better driver. So, yeah, I think it's a whole. I think that's a loaded question.
Fair enough.
Yeah. That's a legit answer, because I don't think I would ever want to race if I hadn't met Garrett Cromsite. I'd still be a third place car. So we should get Monroe on this podcast. That would be.
I can get him.
Can you?
Guys, I talk to him about every 3 weeks.
Dude, I love that. I love that guy. I remember one time he was. I was sitting in my lawn chair and he was walking by with his fire suit hanging down. Like. Bubba Wallace nowadays, like you're not supposed to do. They teach you to, do this stuff. And he had a Sony Walkman and he was, walking around, and he put the headphones on my head. And I was like, what the hell is that? Like, I did not know what that kid was listening to. Screamo, some fastball or something, but he was a breath of fresh air. And you guys hit it right. You talk about Tucson Winter Heat when you guys went down there with Benny Parsons. That was awesome. So, Sean, I appreciate you. I know you're a busy guy. I admire you as a race car driver, and I love your mom and dad. Your dad was always great to me at the track, and I appreciate you coming on. It's been an honor to talk to you, and you had some great insight, and wish you well in the future.
Well, I appreciate it. Great show. A great idea too. I mean, got a lot of great people that you can, I think Spears, Monroe would be great, right?
Yep, let's do it.
Get those guys on there. So, all right. Well, thank you guys. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Sean.
Thanks, Sean. Take care. We'll be talked.